is doing render passes. So I'm just gonna take this scene and just grab, I don't know, maybe some other random presets for this. Oh, perfect. I've made the entire floor copper. That's what I wanted there. We're gonna run with it. All right. But basically, I'm just gonna go over render passes real fast. So, actually, I kind of want to do this in Arnold. All right. So most of you are using Arnold. I'm actually just gonna go over this in Arnold rather than Redshift. So, I'll go back to my AI/GI test. Throw this into Maya. All right. And I'm just going to assign this random ball a new standard surface shader. Dear God. Oh, whoops. Alright. I'm just going to set this to be like coppery because it'll make things hopefully more obvious when I do these demos. Alright. It's so weird looking for some reason to me. Alright, and then I may make this, I'm just sort of like varying the roughness of these objects a little bit because it'll be a little more obvious what I'm doing. So, render passes. Basically, as you render a single image, you can have Maya render additional images that help you with isolating certain areas for post-processing later. And in Arnold, that's called AOV, which stands for Arbitrary Output Variable, which I'm not going to lie, I didn't know that till like yesterday morning when I Wikipedia'd it. But there's all these like weird names for things that I just don't know what anything stands for, but it doesn't really matter. So anywho, in Arnold, if you go into your render settings, you're going to want to go over to this AOVs tab here. And this is basically where you get to control all of the different passes that are added to your objects. So if you click on, for your shadow mats, this is going to be stuff where it'll render, only the shadows. Which would be good for if any of you did the thing from CGI 1 where you have to like composite your object onto a background. You can use the passes from the shadows here. So I'm just going to go into the available AUVs. I'll click on, sure, like let's add a shadow mask. Shadow diff is going to be basically an image that you can, if you're in Photoshop, it would be basically like set it to be a layer on top and set it to difference instead of multiply or overlay. But it's going to subtract out your shadow if you for some reason wanted to get rid of that. But there's a bunch of different stuff that you can add in here. In terms of the built-in, there's, again, a bunch of options. I'm just going to kind of add a few to show you more or less like what they do and how they work. Z is Z-depth. There's a pretty cool thing. If it doesn't show up in this render very well, I'll show you guys another thing because it's really neat. It allows you to go back in and kind of, it's like distance from the camera basically. It'll render an image for that. Then you can go back in post-processing to sort of blur your images without having to render in a blur. But you can also just capture like diffuse. I could render only the specular stuff in my scene. And as you add these, you can see it's moving them into the active list, and it's just making this giant list of little AOVs down here. So if I go back to my scene, and I apparently have been rendering this whole time, if I refresh that render, you can see nothing's visually changed. So AOVs don't really affect the final render that you have, like the beauty pass it's called usually. You'll notice up here in the Arnold render in the upper left, there's this little drop down that by default says beauty. If I click on that now, you'll see that all of these AOVs that I've added into my list in my render settings are now showing up here. So if I click on diffuse, it's going to show me, it's basically separated out anything with a diffuse value. So in this case, I made this chrome, and it just like has no diffuse value because it's chrome. So this is, the diffuse value is now black because it's chrome, so this renders as black. If I look at my shadow and look at, that's actually weird, usually it renders more better than that. Actually, I think most of this was in shadow, so it's kind of a questionable thing. But I can look at my specular, and pretty much anything with shininess, it's rendered only that shininess. So a chrome ball is like super chrome ball-y. This is like slightly rougher, etc. So I don't think this one's going to display very well for this image. I can do a thing to fix that. But again, basically, like, I'm not going to go super hardcore into these because you guys probably don't really need them for much of anything in this class. I just want you guys to be aware that they're there. If you guys ever need to, you know, re-render a single object of your scene, or like separating the specular highlights, you can sort of comp that over your original image and like adjust their levels if you need to make them a little brighter, a little dimmer, without re-rendering your entire image. It just gives you a very convenient way to sort of mask out certain areas of your renders and modify them later. So I'm actually just gonna do a very, very awkward thing and just make this box just shoot towards my camera. Hiya. Alright. If this doesn't show me a good example of Z-depth, I don't know what will. I really do like Z-depth, it's really fun. Alright, so here's my beauty pass, and it looks weirdly trashy. If I go into my Z-depth, a lot of times with this, that's my diffuse. A lot of times with Z-depth, you won't notice like a huge, it pretty much just looks like a white screen. It is important to save these out as either EXRs are preferable, or TIFFs, or like something with a very high level of color information captured. You can see as I start turning the exposure down, when I get to -5, you kind of see a gray highlight here. I'm just gonna go ahead and set this to like -10. And at that point you can see that there's actually a grayscale image of basically how close these objects are to my camera. So like this, super close to my camera, it's gonna show up as much darker gray. The farther back you get, it's more white. And again, you can use this in stuff like After Effects to composite in, blur into your image in post. There's a bajillion YouTube tutorials on that. So I'm not really going to go over that, but yeah, it's just cool. AOVs are fun. They give you a lot of customization ability in your images, and again, potentially just make post-processing a little bit easier. So any questions on any of that? All right. So that was... Oh, one more thing, just in case you guys ever find yourself with... let me just, really quick, I want to go over two things, I guess. So